So this round is called our Supportive Home Round, and it's part of our Agency Collaboration Fund at YEF, which sits within our place-based portfolio. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the Youth Endowment Fund. Many of you may know, but some may not, that we were originally set up by the Home Office with a £200 million endowment and with a mission and a commitment to increase that by an additional 100 million. We are a charity and we are also a What Works centre. And our lifespan is 10 years in total, and we're about 4 years into that now, or almost 4 years. So we've got around six years to go. And our vision is a world where no child or young person becomes involved in violence. And our mission is to find out what works and to build a movement to put this knowledge into practice. Here is our strategy diagram that some of you might have seen. So as you can see on the left-hand side, we are a funder. And we fund programmes across 3 main strands. So we have priority themes. So you may have seen some of our theme-based grant rounds. I think the most recent one was a trusted adult round. Our place-based grant round themes. So there's 2 areas in there. One is our neighbourhood fund and the other one is agency collaboration fund, and targeted projects, which really are different interesting projects that we think have got real promise but don't necessarily fit within our other rounds. We then find out what works through our evaluation processes. We don't undertake evaluation ourselves, we commission others to do that on our behalf. Making existing knowledge more accessible, so through our toolkit, for example. And we've also got quite a strong theme around understanding the lives of young people as well. And then last but not least, we work for change. So we're not interested in producing all these things unless it actually makes a significant difference across the 2 countries that we cover, England and Wales. So we scale up what works, we spread great practice, and we aim to improve the system overall. And with all of that, we work very strongly in a whole range of partnerships. Some of those are listed at the bottom. Which I know that a number of you are from, but we also work with lots of other organisations as well. Next slide, please. So today we're going to outline what we're looking to fund. We're going to explain our approach to evaluation. We're going to tell you more about the application process and we'll answer your questions. So a bit of a recap about what this funding round is all about. So we are wanting the projects to focus on children and young people aged 10 to 20. The reason being we have an interest within this round of those transitional years from children's services into adulthood. And the children need to be at risk of violence or criminal exploitation outside the home. And that's both victims and children and young people who are victims, and also children and young people causing harm. And we'll do that by testing multi-agency and multidisciplinary neighbourhood teams through a feasibility study in the first instance. So this phase of the programme is to fund an up to 18-month feasibility study. And the flexible model is aligned with the recommendations from the Department for Education's independent review of children's social care for this particular cohort of children and young people. We'll fund up to 5 partnership projects in England or Wales, and we'll fund each of those partnerships to set up and implement 2 neighbourhood fund teams. So that would be 10 teams in total across 5 partnerships. And over the 18 months, there will be a preparation phase of up to 6 months where we've appointed a co-design partner who will support partnerships to plan their delivery model and to recruit and train staff, followed by a 12-month implementation period, and will evaluate through a feasibility study. Then, if findings are positive, we'll then fund those sites to scale up their projects for a further 2 years and evaluate through an impact evaluation if that's feasible. And funding for this first phase, so the 18-month phase, will be approximately 500k, sorry, not 50k, per project, plus a match funding expectation of a minimum of 10%, either in cash or in kind. But the budget at this moment is fairly flexible. We're most interested to find out through the preparation phase, the 6-month preparation phase, what the teams need to look like, and then to then agree and finalise the budgets. Next slide, please. So in terms of children and young people in scope, this includes those involved in or at risk of violence outside the home and or criminal exploitation. And the cohort is likely to include, but by no means exclusively, the following children and young people. So including those who are care experienced, children who may have been permanently excluded from school or in receipt of regular fixed term exclusions, off rolling or poor school attendance, those who misuse substances, those who've got parents or siblings who may be involved in crime, those young people who are involved in offending or antisocial behaviour, those who may frequently go missing, those with disabilities, those known to local authority support services, right from early help through to children in need and child protection services and specialist teams. And particularly for those older young people, children who are homeless or in independent or semi-independent accommodation. Next slide, please. And the funding round, YEF are leading on the round, but we have a co-funder, two co-funders, the Children in Need, who many of you will know, and the Hunter Foundation. So we're co-funding this round collectively for this feasibility phase. So what will we fund through this grant round? So the applications that we want to fund, first of all, the lead applicant must be the local authority. And we've set out a number of other mandatory partners, and that includes police, mental health, education, including schools, probation, and voluntary sector or social enterprise organisations. But that's not exclusive. Applications can include a whole range of partners, but must include those. Applicants must demonstrate a need for this type of service through their local data sets. The number of children and young people eligible for this type of support must be in the hundreds for each team, although in terms of how many you would be working with over the feasibility phase, that's still to be determined, but there needs to be that level of demand at this stage. And partnerships must have the ability to scale with these numbers into at least 2 other neighbourhoods, although there is a possibility, if that's proving difficult for particular partnerships, to join up with another local authority area to enable that scale up. So agencies in the partnership must have senior leadership endorsement for the application, and we are particularly interested in applicants who can demonstrate strong local leadership. We're also interested in areas which are already delivering this type of partnership model for this cohort of children and young people, but you may not be delivering all of it. So you might be partially there, but not fully there, and that's absolutely fine. And we want to know if the cohort of children and young people in your area is already involved in a large-scale impact evaluation, including any impact evaluation that's funded by YEF. That doesn't necessarily automatically exclude an application, but I'm sure you'll understand we're keen that we're not duplicating any funding, both from a funding perspective, but also from an evaluation perspective as well. So I'm just going to pass on to my colleague, Sarah, who's going to talk through the evaluation slides.
Thanks, Gail. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to talk in a bit why we do it and what it looks like in this context. So as Gail mentioned earlier, YEF is a What Works centre, meaning we're part of a network of What Works organisations across the UK, all focused on the generation and better use of high quality evidence. And because of this, evaluation is sort of integral to the way we work and everything that we do. At YEF, we never fund the delivery of the programme without also funding its evaluation, and we tend to see the programme delivery and the evaluation as 2 important parts of a whole. So that's sort of where we're coming from. This slide gives a bit more detail on sort of why this is the case, why we're focused on evaluation. And in essence, the core reason is because we want to find out what works in preventing children and young people from becoming involved in crime and violence. And evaluation helps us to answer that question. It helps us understand not only what works, but also in what context, including for whom, when, and how, which ultimately enables us to provide the best support possible. There's a few more specific reasons outlined here on the slide. You can see there's 4 boxes. So the first one being about to evaluate whether programs are having their intended impact, because we can't just assume that to be the case. We have a responsibility to ensure that what we fund and deliver is serving young people, and to go a step further to ensure that the programs aren't actually harmful, because there are examples where this has unknowingly been the case. The second one there is about supporting grantee organisations. It's a key principle at YEF to ensure the evaluations are beneficial to grantees and projects themselves. And we think that having robust evaluation does this in 2 ways. Firstly, it supports organisations to make improvements to what they're delivering by knowing what's working well and what isn't, and also helps to make the case to others by sort of communicating the proven benefits. And that could be to children and families, in order to sort of sell the offer and increase engagement, or to secure further funding. The third point we've got here is about building the evidence base. So we're very conscious that there's a big evidence gap in England and Wales, meaning that we don't know what prevents children and young people from becoming involved in crime and violence at this time, and there's still a lot to learn. So in each YEF grant round, we're building more and more evidence and understanding through the evaluations that are taking place, and therefore contributing to addressing that gap. And finally, we've got about sharing best practice and scaling what works and making the case for change on a larger scale, because ultimately the evaluation that we do and the data that we generate will help other programmes and funders and commissioners learn from strong evidence on what works. There's a couple of further points I just wanted to highlight here in terms of the nature of the evaluation. As Gail mentioned, all of the evaluations undertaken are independent, which means that they're conducted by an evaluator that's drawn from our panel of expert organisations. So grantees themselves don't need to be experts in evaluation, but they do need to be willing to work with an evaluator and be guided by them in the process of designing an evaluation. This is a condition of our grants, but it also offers quite a good opportunity for learning. And even though the evaluator is independent, we expect them to be well integrated into the project rather than feeling like something that's bolted on. And for this grant round, we'll actually have the same evaluator across all of the funded areas. There'll be good opportunities for drawing together what's learned across the areas. We also strive to fund evaluations that are as rigorous as possible, which means that we strive to conduct randomised control trials or similar, which are the gold standards in evidence generation. And we're focused on long-term follow-up. So the way we set up evaluations using our data archive ensures that we can not just understand short-term outcomes, but also understand longer sustained impact. I won't talk in detail about the data archive here, but there's more information about our approach and that element specifically on our website. This slide that we've got up here is a bit more detail on the specific approach that we're planning to take to evaluation in the context of this grant round. And we're proposing a 2-stage approach. And the second stage is conditional on the outputs from the first. Gail already started to explain this a little bit, but essentially, as you can see here, stage 1 is what we're referring to as a feasibility study. And this itself has 2 parts. So one part of this is about pilot activity. So it's understanding how the multi-agency approach should be implemented across different contexts based on what we know now. So it's really about generating early lessons about promising practice and how this might vary between different contexts, depending on things like different systems conditions, different natures of partnership and different geographies. And then the other part of the feasibility study is assessing the feasibility of doing an impact evaluation. So assessing whether it's feasible to do a robust impact study, and if so, what would be the best way to go about this. This is where we'll be asking the evaluators to look at all the options, focusing on rigorous methods like randomised controlled trials or quasi-experimental designs. And then stage 2, which as I said is dependent on stage 1, is about actually evaluating the impact of the programme on outcomes related to crime and violence. So if this goes ahead, it will have a primary outcome that is the main focus, such as the effects on offending behaviour for young people. And it will also have multiple secondary outcomes, which will include outcomes for children and young people, but also for families and carers and the wider community. And there will also be an implementation or a process evaluation alongside this, which helps understand not just what the effect was, but also get more information about how and why the impact had been achieved, which generates really useful evidence in terms of influencing policy and practice. So again, Gail started to touch on the timelines here, but just to recap, so before the feasibility study starts, there would be a 6-month preparation phase. Then that feasibility study would take place over 12 months. Then there would be a 3 to 6 month transition period in between. And then where a decision will be made about whether to proceed to stage 2 based on the findings from the feasibility study. And then if stage 2 does proceed, that would take place over a period of 2 to 3 years. I've just got one more slide on evaluation, which is where I've drawn out a couple of the specific aims of that stage 1 feasibility study, given that's most relevant at this stage. So those aims would be developing a strong hypothesis for how the partnership model should be implemented in different contexts, generating lessons on the effective implementation of a multi-agency family help team to support children and young people, and to explore the feasibility and present options, analysis and clear recommendations for a robust impact evaluation. So all of those things would then inform how we proceeded, if and how we proceeded into stage 2. As I mentioned earlier, the evaluator will be the same across all of the funded areas, and we're currently going through that process of commissioning the evaluator. And yeah, I will stop there because that's quite a lot of information, but we're not going into too much detail, so do feel free to reach out if you've got questions, and I will post a link to where you can find a bit more information about evaluation on our website. But yeah, I will hand back over to you, Gail.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Hannah. So what does assessment look like? So we have, when you put your application in, we have 6 assessment criteria, and we put equal weight onto whether it's a great plan with strong capability to deliver. Next slide, please. So in terms of the assessment criteria, I'll just very briefly talk through each one of them. And I've just seen in the chat that someone's asked, will these slides be available? Yes, they will. This video will be available, and the slides and Q&As from today and from last week, all on our website. So don't worry if you don't capture everything. You'll be able to pick it up later. So the first one is a worthwhile outcome. So what we're trying to do is to assess that if you deliver your project well, whether the outcome that we are hoping to achieve will prevent children from becoming involved in violence. The second assessment criteria that we are using is if it's delivered well, how likely it is to achieve that outcome. So in other words, we're trying to find out whether your project is likely to work. So we're interested in, have you clearly explained how your project would run and how it might lead to change? Our third assessment criteria is seeing if you are aiming to reach the right type of young people. So the sort of information we'll be looking for there, which you may have seen from the questions that we've put up on the website, is do you have enough young people in this cohort, and how can you tell us that you know that for sure? So we're interested in seeing some of the data sets that you might have got in your local area. Next slide, please. The fourth assessment criteria is a likely the likelihood that the project will lead to future change. So as we mentioned earlier, a core part of our strategy is scaling projects that are really promising and that we find that work. So we are interested, and I can see some questions coming up in the chat as well, that there is the potential to scale your project initially through an impact study in your local area or joining up with another local area. Number 5 is your ability to deliver. So we really want to know, and this is where things like strong leadership come in, the type of ensuring that you have sign off from all your senior officers in the mandatory organisations in the partnership, that you've got really strong evidence of previous relevant experience, and that support training and supervision, for example, that's provided to delivery staff is all in place or could be in place if you were successful. And finally, last but not least, whether the project is evaluable. So Sarah's obviously covered in depth some of our approach to evaluation, but here we're trying to assess whether or not we can properly evaluate what you're doing. Next slide, please. Some of you may be familiar with the Youth Endowment Fund, and at the YEF we have an extremely strong commitment to equality. And it's really important to us that any organisation that receives a grant from us is equally committed to equality, whether that's a grantee delivering a project, an evaluator, a researcher, whoever really that we do business with. And the reason for that, or one of the reasons for that, is that children, and I'm sure that you all know this, but children and young people from marginalised backgrounds are significantly overrepresented in the youth justice system. And it's so important that our funding is used in a way that reaches and represents the children we're here to serve. So part of our assessment process is assessing applicant commitment to equality in the way that we expect. So that will be part of our assessment process, not just in the application form, but also once shortlisted at the interview stage as well. So we have an online portal for applications. Some of you may be familiar with it. And this is a sort of very brief overview of how to use the portal. Again, if you do make an application, this will all be very apparent when you start applying. We've put the questions on our website so that you can refer to them. Many people, when they're doing an application, like to do it separately, myself included, in a Word document, for example, and then want to copy and paste rather than going straight into a portal. So that enables you to do that, to see the questions in advance. So first of all, it's find the form, which clicking the link on there will take you to our online portal. We recommend using Google Chrome on your browser if possible. I think most people can probably access that. Step 2 is entering your information. There's an ability to save and then come back to your work at step 3, and then obviously step 4 to send us your application. We try and make the process as straightforward as we possibly can. So we have had people checking with fresh eyes that the language we use is simple and straightforward, and the processes are as straightforward as they possibly can. So hopefully it won't be too onerous when you come to using the application process. So next steps, what happens next? So in terms of the application timeline, as you know, we went live last Tuesday, so we've been open exactly a week. Then we have a 10-week application window. So the 16th of May at 5 p.m. is the date where we will close for applications. What I think referred to earlier, but just to reiterate, during that the first 7 weeks, sorry, of the application window, you are able to submit questions, clarification questions. All of those will be published on our website with an answer. They are anonymised, so if you ask a question on the website, it will just be the question rather than where the questions come from. So do feel free to ask any questions as you go along until that window shuts. We're then, week beginning the 17th of May, we'll be shortlisting applications for interview, and then week beginning the 12th of June, we'll start that interview process. We have a board, as you can imagine, most organisations do, called the Grants and Evaluation Committee, and it's our GECO board which receives and approves successful applicants, and we've got a provisional slot there in mid-July. And then following that, there's the usual grant agreement sign off, and depending how quickly that can happen, sites will then start preparation of up to 6 months, and after that, an implementation phase of 12 months. So just to refer you, if you're not familiar with the YEF Toolkit, in preparing your application, you may want to have a look at the available evidence base. And we have our YEF Toolkit. You can access that from the YEF website. And it summarises a whole range of research to make it accessible and actionable. It doesn't include absolutely everything because the toolkit team are working really hard to add new topics all the time, but it is really comprehensive and you might find it useful to have a look at, particularly for family type interventions, and to be able to sort of have a think about of those in to help you with your application. Next slide, please. So that's the end of the formal presentation. We do have a dedicated grants inbox for you to send any questions that you have, which is grants@youthendowmentfund.org.uk. Again, that's also on the website.